Today, we will provide retirement considerations for you to discuss with your own financial advisor. In this webinar setting, we couldn't possibly provide advice that would be applicable to your individual and unique situations. We plan to leave you with lots to think about, though, and later we'll offer you an opportunity to scan a QR code and schedule a brief individual appointment with Greg and/or Steve. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our presenters. I'll begin by telling you a bit about Stephen Craffen, who is Senior Vice President and Financial Advisor at the Wealth Enhancement Group. Stephen pursued a career in engineering before transitioning to his passion, helping people meet their financial goals. In 1993, he founded an independent advisory firm with a client-first approach to financial planning before joining forces with Atlas Financial. As a member of the National Association of Financial Planners, Steve advocates for ethical financial planning practices and supports the development of aspiring advisors, serving as chair of the National Board from 2018 to 2019. As a financial planner, Steve focuses on the unique needs of executives, professionals, and business owners in solving their financial challenges and goals. One of his 4 degrees is a Rutgers Business School MBA. Thank you for joining us, Steve. And
Thanks.
Greg Giardino is Vice President and Financial Advisor, also at Wealth Enhancement Group. He boasts over 15 years of experience in the financial planning industry. Greg's passion for wealth management started at home. It was sadly when his father unexpectedly passed away at an early age. But Greg's family fortunately remained financially stable because of the steps his father took with estate and legacy planning. His experience inspired Greg to help his own clients protect their biggest asset, their families. As a fiduciary, Greg takes a client-first approach to financial planning and holds the prestigious Certified Financial Planner certification, along with the Certified Private Wealth Advisor certification. His insights have appeared in various media publications, including the Wall Street Journal and Barron's, among others. He is a member of the New Jersey chapter of the Financial Planning Association and the Investments and Wealth Institute. Thank you for joining us, Greg, and I'll hand things over to you to get started.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Margaret. We're really excited to be here today to discuss retirement withdrawal strategies with our viewers. So you're probably all wondering, why this topic? Well, at some point, eventually everyone will need a plan on how to take money out of their retirement nest egg. And we found that there's no one consensus, there's no one agreed upon best strategy on how to do that. However, there's a ton of information on what to do before you retire, right? Some of the advice out there is save early and save as much as possible. Make sure you're properly diversified. Make sure you keep your fees low, right? This is pretty prevalent information, but when it comes to retirement, knowing where and when to take $1 is much more nuanced. So Steve and I today will review that with you. We also found that there's many risks once you retire. Risks become magnified. And you'll find through our presentation that it's way easier to get up the hill than it is to get down it. So we'll review with you some of these catastrophic risks.
Or at least to go down the hill slowly.
Yeah, very slowly.
Yeah.
And then finally, well, what withdrawal strategy is right for you? Is it the 4% withdrawal rule? Could it be a guardrails type of strategy? Steve and I will demystify with you today what those strategies are so you can make the most informed decision for your family. And as Margaret mentioned earlier on the webinar today, make sure you stay into the end where we'll answer all your questions. And if you have a personal and detailed question, you can scan a QR code and we'd be happy to answer those questions for you.
Yep.
So with that being said, let's dive into some of these risks that retirees face. All right, so probably the biggest risk is what's called sequence of return risk. So what does that mean? So the order in which you receive your returns once you retire, the order matters. So whether you receive positive returns or you receive negative returns can have a huge impact. We're going to talk more about that. While living a long life is great, if you didn't plan for it in your retirement plan, it can be catastrophic and can cause you to outlive your retirement savings. So that's one thing we really need to pay attention to. And then finally, what if you have an extended healthcare event? What if you need long-term care? That can really put a crimp in your retirement paycheck. So these are things we really need to pay attention to. All right, so we're going to start with sequence of returns risk. So here we have 3 hypothetical scenarios in retirement. So this is annual returns, and we're going to start with the top graph here. What if you receive great returns once you retire for the first 9 years, and then for the remaining 20 years, you have, so-so returns? What if when you retire, you are steady Eddie? You have a solid 5% rate of return every year, so that's in gray. And then what if when you retire, Murphy's Law happens, you get hit with a negative 20% return. The second year, you get hit with another negative return, and then your good returns finally come at the end. So let's see how these portfolios fare. So this chart, this assumes a $1 million starting portfolio balance and a 4% average annual withdrawal rate. So you can see here the great start, the bad ending, the purple line ends up with 1.6 million at the end of their plan at the end of 30 years. The steady Eddie winds up with about 631,000, not too bad. But look at that green line. Because the order of their returns was negative when they first retired, they had to sell their stocks at fire sale prices. So their portfolio only lasts 23 years.
Yeah,
so this is
they never recover. Yep.
I'm sorry, Steve?
They never recover. That's the problem, because they've sold growth assets at fire sale prices, like you said. They never recover. And so when the market does recover, they've already sold assets that probably would have recovered, but they're gone.
So this could be catastrophic. And if you don't have a plan for this risk, it's almost like taking a permanent pay decrease to your retirement paycheck. So this is one of the biggest hidden risks, maybe one of the most catastrophic, that retirees need to pay attention to.
Yep.
All right, so there's a lot of data out there that life expectancies are increasing. But what's unique about this chart, what I really like, is not only does it give you a population average of hitting a certain age, but what if in a married couple, one of the couple is actually in excellent health and is a non-smoker? How does that impact the probabilities? So if you'll draw your attention to that third bar graph there, the blue one, of at least one of a couple, you could see the dark shades here. That is the population average percentage of making it to one age. And the lighter blue color is actually if one of the couple is a non-smoker in excellent health. So as you can see here at age 95, the average, if you're both 65 years old today, there's a 17% chance of one of you making it to age 95. And as you can see, that jumps to 43% if one of you is a non-smoker and in excellent health. So I think the take-home point here is that we're living longer. And when you run your financial projections and retirement projections, it would be prudent to assume perhaps maybe both husband and spouse live to age 100 or age 95 at a minimum. So you want to be prudent when you project your retirement income out.
Yeah, and I just want to mention this is based on current statistics and what we know today regarding health care issues and so forth. And we only expect this to increase. It may increase more slowly than it has. We may be running up against some bumps in terms of how much longer they can extend longevity. But if you're 65, I would plan on 95 to 100, and we always do. We may actually start planning to 105, believe it or not, in some cases.
So a lot of clients will ask, well, what should we estimate for healthcare expenses? So we took this data from HealthView Services. It's a leading provider of healthcare projections. And this could be a really good starting point. So these are monthly costs for when you enroll onto Medicare. So Medicare Plan G, that's basically a Medicare supplement plan. It'll pick up all the gaps of what original Medicare A and B does not pick up. Things like deductibles, coinsurance, figure around $149 a month. And then you could see here out-of-pocket costs, Part D, which is prescriptions, Part B, which is for doctor visits. You're looking at about $572 a month total for healthcare expenses. Here's the key point: per person. So for a married couple, you're probably looking at closer to $14,000. And if you're one of those high earners in retirement, well, you may get dinged and have to pay extra for Medicare Part D and Part B something called IRMA surcharges. So
Right.
keep that in mind when you're looking at your retirement income.
And that could increase to $300 or $400 to $500 a month per person as well, if you're in the top IRMA bracket.
Yeah, easily. Now, there's a chart here on long-term care risks. So when we say long-term care, what do we mean? Well, that's when you need help with 2 out of the 6 activities of what we call daily living. So if you need help with bathing, dressing, moving from room to room, etc. So as you can see, the costs here projected into the future, especially for nursing home care in Trenton, astronomical. However, statistically speaking, what a lot of folks don't know is that the probabilities of needing long-term care are actually not as large as they may appear. Recent statistics say that I think it's a little bit over 60% of folks actually never need any long-term care, and that it's a small percentage of folks, maybe 9 or 10%, that may be the anomaly that wind up spending over $250,000 on long-term care expenses. Regardless, I think it's critically important that you stress test your plan with a long-term care event at age 80 or age 82, because that's the national average of when a long-term care event happens, to make sure your portfolio can withstand this type of event and make sure your legacy is preserved.
Yeah, my gut feeling here is if they come up with some sort of medical treatments for Alzheimer's and also better treatments for strokes, you probably will see this decrease further, because those are two of the principal reasons people end up in nursing homes, by the way, at least for long periods of time.
Now, once we know the risks, well, how do we figure out how much do we need in retirement? So you may have heard studies by Fidelity, Charles Schwab. Oh, well, you need
Mhm.
pre-retirement income of 70% or 80%. That's what's called the income replacement rate. So if you draw your attention to the right side of the screen in the example, we have a married couple that were making $200,000. This is how you figure that out. So you may not need to be contributing $25,000 a year in retirement, because now you're switching to spending. So that's money you won't need. Presumably, you may be in a lower tax bracket. Not everyone's in a lower tax bracket, but in this example, you don't need that extra $25,000 to pay for taxes. And maybe you have a robust pension or Social Security benefit.
Mhm.
So that's income you won't need from the portfolio. So therefore, you really need $100,000 in retirement at a 50% replacement rate. And what you do is you divide it by the safe withdrawal rate of 4%. Steve's going to dive into that a little bit later. But if you take 100,000 divided by 4%, you need approximately $2.5 million to sustain that. So
Yep.
keep in mind, once again, this is a rule of thumb. We find that a lot of lower wage earners, they need to replace roughly, call it 90% of their pre-retirement income, where those higher earners may need closer to 50 to 60%.
Yep.
So rather than take a rule of thumb approach, we like to take a cash flow approach. What we mean by that is not only do we have to figure out your income in retirement, but what about your expenses? And what about those lumpy expenses that happen? So we do something called a Monte Carlo simulation. All that means is we take 1,000 different trial runs. We randomize statistically the stock market returns. What if the stock market has bad years when you retire? What if they're average years, or what if they're great years? What if inflation
Yes.
is high? What if inflation is lower? So by taking all this information, we can give you a better assessment of the probability of you having to make an adjustment in retirement. So it's critically important you use this type of approach as opposed to that flat percentage income rate that we see so often in the news.
And I just want to mention Monte Carlo, the name came out of the Manhattan Project originally. It's a kind of a goofy name. But I will say it's a very strong approach. It actually came out of engineering originally, but there are some weaknesses to it. So I would be somewhat cautious with the numbers, because it does tend to overestimate the odds that you'll run out of money for various reasons statistically. But it's still a very good approach.
Exactly. It'll, like you said, Steve, it's a wide swath of ranges, but we'd rather be vaguely right than
Yes.
precisely wrong. And it's
Yep.
a pretty good tool.
Yes, it definitely is.
Now, most folks will say, oh, I signed up for a free online retirement calculator and it looks pretty good, right? My retirement projection. And then
Mhm.
they'll sit down with us and we'll say, well, did you include certain expenses like future car purchases? That's important. You may be purchasing another car or two throughout your retirement journey that should be factored in. Well, what
Probably more
about
than that.
yeah, no, it's expensive nowadays. And
Yeah.
what about these surcharges if you're a high income earner? That should be factored in. What about if you wanted to gift the down payment to your children to pay for a home 3 years from now? Did they factor that in? It's critically important. You really look at those lumpy expenses
Yeah.
because those can really throw off a retirement
And
plan.
home improvements are another one that a lot of people may not factor in.
Exactly. So once we have an idea of the risks we're up against, and then we also know our retirement income sources, and then we know our retirement expenses, at that point we can then start to figure out, well, what is the best withdrawal strategy for my family? So with
Hmm.
that being said, I'm going to swing things over to Steve, and he can talk to you more about some of the popular strategies that are out there.
Yeah. And so we're going to really focus on really two here. I'm going to bring up a third that we don't really cover because we have limited time here. But the first rule is one you may have heard of. That's the 4% rule. And it was devised by a fellow called Bill Bengen, who was a NAPFA member and actually was an engineer as well. He's still alive. I don't make it sound like Bill's not around. He's still alive. But he was probably the first one to start to answer the question regarding how much money can you safely take from a diversified portfolio each year, such that the odds are high you're not going to run out of money. And so what he did is he used that Monte Carlo process, that statistical process, to test various differences in the order of returns. And what he actually did is he took past returns on stocks and bonds from 1926 to 1992 and used, for those statisticians out there, used a bootstrap process to take the same exact returns but reorder them. And that's actually probably a stronger way to try to simulate something. But by trying to estimate what you think the returns on a market really are going to be, you can use past history, look at what they really were. And so at the beginning, you assumed an allocation of 50-50 for U.S. large and treasuries. And the reason why I use treasuries because you invest in bonds, quite honestly, if you the reason for having bonds in particular in part is because of the income they generate, but also you want something that's not correlated with the stock market, and also something that provides a reservoir of safe value and wealth that you can tap even in the worst markets like 2008, for example. So he used treasuries. And by the way, corporates is another whole issue. We could probably do a whole seminar on them. We don't really generally recommend corporates for many, many reasons. But anyway, the results of this, he came out that you can do roughly a 4% rule, but he based it initially on allocation that ranged from 50 to 75% in stocks. But he didn't incorporate a couple of other asset classes that he added in later on. He added in mid cap stocks, small cap stocks, and also the U.S. Aggregate Bond Index, which does include corporates, by the way. But what's interesting is he determined that one of the worst years to retire, and which he incorporated in, was 1968. And for those that are old enough to remember this, and I was probably about 12, 13 when it happened, that was when the market peaked. The Dow Jones peaked around just barely broke 1,000. It did not reach that level, and it actually breached that level completely for any period of time until I think 1981. And so 1968 was actually a terrible time to retire, believe it or not. But he incorporated that worst period in there as well. But after he added these other asset classes, he concluded that you could probably get the safe withdrawal rate up to around 4.5% or 4.3% with small stock. But to me, it's you're pushing it a little bit because you may have read recently that some people claim that even the 4% may be too aggressive. I don't really think it is, but I do think it. You may just want to play it safe and keep it to around 4. So you can go to the next. Yeah, and so yeah, actually, Bill came up with a number of graphs. We have a whole book on it and a number of graphs that he created. But this one is probably the one that summarizes it all. And so he assumed a 30% tax rate, which may or may not be applicable. If you're in a lower tax rate, this may actually improve your odds, especially if you're drawing from an IRA. But he used 53% large cap stocks here, 26% small, and 21% here, actually, in intermediate term government bonds. And you can see here at a 3.8% withdrawal rate, the odds of you running out of money for 30 years were actually 0%. And you can see there, the worst case, the money lasted 30 years, and that's in yellow. And the purple bars, or I guess they're purple, show the odds that you did not run out of money. So when you hit 4%, you were around 99%. Now keep in mind, he did 30 years. And so that is a weakness here. And if you're 65, and as we mentioned, you could live to 100. You want to be somewhat more conservative for that reason alone. But on the other hand, you also don't want to you may not want to end up with too much money in your portfolio. How about, you want to enjoy it too, right? And so there is a trade-off here, but I think 4% is probably a reasonable rate. But you just want to look at it on a year-to-year basis. But there is actually an even better approach to this, which I'll mention briefly. So you can go to the next slide.
If I could just add to our
Sure,
viewers,
yes, yeah.
for any of those viewers that are early retirees and planning for a 40-year time horizon, the 4% rule, to think through it, might be actually closer to 3.5%. So you
Yep.
may not want to go much lower than that, but just keep that in mind if there's anybody listening that may
Yep.
be in that situation.
That's right. And so we advocate what we call a three-bucket strategy, quite honestly, and this helps reduce that sequence risk that Greg mentioned earlier. So we want to we don't keep generally a year to 3 years worth of money in cash, but we'll keep a significant amount of a client's spending need in cash, typically 6 to 8 months, in something very, very liquid. And then the next bucket will be the safest bonds, things you can tap and sell even in a worse market. And that's why we don't advocate corporates, by the way, because they tend to act like corporate stock and market declines like 2008. But that's that intermediate bucket, and you can cover 5 to 10 years worth of expenses, but probably, I would say 3 to 5 years may be enough. The average bear market lasts about 18 to 24 months. So if you have maybe 3 to 5 years in the safest bonds, you have enough to cover you from having to sell something at fire sale prices. And then the longer term portion of your portfolio, we want to have that poised for growth and also to stay ahead of inflation, which it could rear its head again. We saw it obviously about 2 or 3 years ago. Inflation spiked at 9%. So you need to have things that will help you keep even with inflation and help hopefully your income grow with respect to inflation. But now what we do recommend, by the way, and a lot of people do not do it on their own, is they don't rebalance. And we rebalance automatically for our clients, but it's imperative that you rebalance, and that helps keep the risk level of your portfolio the same, because there's always going to be some things that outgrow others. So you want to try to keep it the risk level roughly the same by not having become overweighted to a pretty aggressive asset class because it grew more quickly. And it's also a way to, frankly, to sell high and buy low. Because when you're rebalancing, you're selling something that's appreciated and buying something that may have declined in price, and you're buying it at a better price. But there are reasons to be cautious about that, which I can't talk about here, but we're happy to discuss that with you. And so you don't want to take from buckets that are you don't want to touch for years. And so there are other ideas, and one of them is to have guaranteed income, and that's to buy an annuity. A lot of people don't have pensions any longer. If you work in a government for a government or some organization like that, you may have a pension, and that's a great thing to have. But you're also faced with some rough choices there with a pension too. There are many different pension options. You could take the full pension, 100%, but not leave anything for your survivor, your spouse. You could also take a reduced pension and also leave money for your spouse. So you have to look at that, and you have to really see what makes the most sense in terms of your overall circumstance. But the issue with most guaranteed income sources, other than Social Security, there's no cost of living adjustment. So that cost of living adjustment is going to have to come from your invested assets. Other than Social Security, now Social Security has that, and that's one of the phenomenal benefits of Social Security. And that's why it's so important to properly plan for when you decide to take Social Security, because can make a big difference if you wait till age 70 and you're getting $4,500 a month and you get a 2.5% increase on that argument's sake versus taking it early and only getting $3,000 a month, argument's sake, and getting a 2.5% on that. Additionally, there's also survivorship issues here too. But when you buy an annuity on your own, typically what happens is you're handing that money to the insurance company, and there's no recourse. Once you've done that, you accept that income payment for life. You're actually taking that money out of your estate, and it's something your children will not receive. And also, if you chose the life only option, your survivor will not receive any payments either. You can do a life certain. There's a 10 or 20 per life certain, but typically end up with a lower payment up front. Now, an annuity may make sense for the right person. It depends. It depends on whether you want to have a steady recurring amount of income each month just for psychological reasons. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's something you really want to simulate it and see whether it makes sense or not. Okay.
And Steve, if I could just add real quick,
Sure.
just for our
Yeah.
viewers, common misconception is folks that consider annuitizing or creating their own pension. They may get a rate from the insurance company and it's like, oh, an 8% payout rate or a 9% payout rate. Remember, the payout rate is not the rate of return you're earning.
Right.
So how it works with the annuities, when you give the principal to the insurance company, they actually pay you your money back. So if you give them $1 million, they're going to pay you for the next, call it 15, 16 years, your money back. And then in year 16 or 17, that's when they'll dip into their own pockets and then they'll pay you out of their coffers. So
Well,
once again,
mortality credits. It's mortality credits. Effectively, they may have overestimated who's going to die, but or underestimated who's going to die. But you're actually taking advantage of the fact you've lived longer than the other people. You beat the game.
exactly. So in
Yeah.
other words, to calculate your real rate of return, it's not going to be 8 or 9%. It might be closer to 3.5% or 4 or 5 based
Yep.
upon how long you live. So just keep that in mind.
Yep. That's right. Yep. And so there's another strategy you may have heard of. This was a fellow called Guyton came up with this. And it's sort of a complex strategy, and it's one that you may have heard of it. That's why we're covering it. It's not one I necessarily recommend. And it's this: you start out with an initial withdrawal rate anywhere from 4 to 6% in your 60s, they said. And what you do is you adjust your how much you pull out of your portfolio based on the performance of the portfolio in relation to how much you're pulling out. So, argument's sake, if you pull out, say, if you have $1 million and you decided on a 5.4% withdrawal rate, you're taking a 54,000. Now, if the market does really well, such that your withdrawal rate is dropped to the percentage, argument's sake, 4.5%, well, you can up your withdrawal rate to bring it back up again because now your portfolio grew. But if your portfolio declines, now you have the other issue where your withdrawal rate went up in relation to the size of the portfolio. You may have gone up to 6.5%, argument's sake, in this case. Now you're going to have to reduce your spending level. And with these guardrails, Guyton estimated you could actually have a higher withdrawal rate in the long run. But there are a lot of issues with this we've discovered. For example, if your spending could drop precipitously when there are really bad events like the market decline in 2000 or even the Great Depression and other times. So we actually advocate for a different approach, which we don't really cover here, but we're happy to discuss it with you. It's something based more on those Monte Carlo projections that Greg brought up earlier. And there's also some complexity here. You have to look at it every year and decide, well, gee, should I increase my withdrawal rate or not? And it doesn't necessarily take into account lumpy expenses. By the way, neither does the 4% either. That's why we really recommend you do a real simulation rather than this. And it is also, as Greg put here, it's hard to tighten your belt. It's hard. Once you got used to that spending rate, you're going to want to stay at that, right? We all do. So, okay. And the other thing is you want to consider is tax diversification. What happens when you hit, for example, 73 or 75, depending upon your age, you're going to have to do required minimum distributions from your IRA, which could push you into a very high tax bracket. So it's good to have things in taxable accounts. Also, Roth IRAs, if you can do Roth conversions, because that'll help reduce your RMDs at age 73 or 75. And additionally, you have a pot of money that's never going to be taxed that you could use. And you can also start to play around more with your tax rates then too. We typically recommend Roth conversions. There's usually a window from the time you retire into potentially until you start taking Social Security, where you could be in a really low tax bracket. It could be in 12%, 10 or 12%. And you can fill up that bracket and have that money taxed, argument's sake, at a 12 to even to a 22% bracket. Whereas at age 75, because your RMDs, you could be forced into a much higher bracket, maybe, I don't know, 28, 32%, whatever the brackets are at that time. And so it makes sense to have tax diversification here. It's also good from another issue, and that's what we call asset placement in terms of what types of investments you have and what types of accounts, depending upon what types of income it generates. Okay, and so this just kind of reiterates that you want to have some flexibility and also where to spend what we call smart money. And it's good to always have a smart place to take money, even in times of emergency. And so it's really good to have tax diversification. Okay.
So, as Steve had mentioned, tax diversification is really important. And when it comes once you pick your withdrawal strategy, then it comes time, well, where should I take a dollar from? So conventional wisdom will tell us you want to first draw down and fully deplete your taxable assets. What are those? Those are the assets that are maybe outside your retirement plan, that are in a brokerage account that you funded with savings or after-tax money, and they're fully taxable every year. And then once you deplete the taxable money down, then you now move and start taking $1 from your tax-deferred accounts, 401ks, 403bs. And then finally take from tax advantage accounts, Roth IRAs, and health savings accounts. So we have an example here. If you have a $1 million account in a 25-year time horizon, you have a taxable account earning 8% with a 25% tax rate, and you have a Roth IRA earning 8% with no tax. Well, guess what? Where you spend the money first matters. So if you spend the Roth money first, that will generate $6,600 a month in income. And if you spend the taxable money first instead of the Roth, it's $7,300 a month. So this is a big deal. Conventional wisdom's not bad, but once again, that's a general rule of thumb.
Yeah, and there's some complexities here. It also depends on what type of assets you have in your taxable account, because if you generally have growth-oriented assets and you're paying capital gains tax, it could only be taxed at 15%. And there are other complexities, and that's why it's good to simulate it. These are decent rules of thumb, but also it's something to think about, but ultimately, really simulating it's really an important thing.
That's a great point, Steve. And I think our viewers will get tired of me saying this, but if you've got any take-home point today, we do not like conventional wisdom. We do not like rules of thumb. So what if in retirement, taking a combination of the two, taxable accounts and tax-deferred accounts, is the best way to go about it, and then leaving the Roth IRA to spend last? So what you need to do every year, take a look at your current tax return, and then project out what your future tax rates may be. So as Steve mentioned, we want to look for some low tax bracket years. And by the way, you should never, ever let a low tax bracket go to waste, because you can get things on sale. So
we call it tax arbitrage, by the way, is actually a term.
And there's certain academic research that if you do these Roth conversions during low tax bracket years, we call it the tax planning window. And you do it to certain tax brackets, and you fully deplete your taxable accounts to pay for these Roth conversions, it could actually sustain or prolong your portfolio 2 to 7% longer than conventional wisdom. So that may not sound like a lot, but it does make a big difference. So we use some of those academic studies when we work with our clients.
And so you bring up a good point here, Greg, that when you do those conversions out of a taxable IRA into a Roth, you should pay the tax that you incur out of a taxable account, because you can actually contribute more to the Roth by doing that.
No, good point. And over a 20-year time horizon, and if you use the taxable money to pay those taxes, it's almost like getting an additional 5% rate of return. So the math does work that way. And then this graph, this is just a hypothetical scenario. Okay, on the left-hand side, those turquoise bars, that's the federal income tax that's going to be paid. So you can see there's opportunities where we have low tax bracket years, right? From 2033 to 2041. The graph on the far right, those yellow bars, that is indicating when we're doing these Roth conversions. So you could see here, this person in this hypothetical situation is saving on their lifetime tax bill almost $700,000 by doing these Roth conversions at the right time. And if you take the tax savings and you reinvest it back into your portfolio, they can leave an additional, I think the number here is almost $1 million extra at the end of 30 years. So these can have a gigantic impact if you implement them during the right time.
Here's a simple way to look at a tax deferred account like an IRA. If you have $1 million and you're in a 30% bracket, well, effectively the government owns 300,000 of it. But if you can pull it out when you're in a 12% bracket, the government only owns 120,000 of it. So that's a good way of looking at it, quite honestly.
Big tax savings.
So
a lot of our viewers may be wondering, well, how risky should I be with my portfolio when I retire? The critical time frame is what we call the fragile risk zone. So that's the 10 years right before you retire and the 10 years right after you retire. So conventional wisdom would say, well, you should be getting more conservative. And there's a popular investment choice out there known as a target retirement date fund. So what that is, it's a fund when you're younger in age, away from retirement, it's going to be more aggressive, and then it's going to slowly get more conservative until you hit your required desired target date. So in this example, there is a very popular investment company that offers a target retirement date fund.
Actually, there's several.
I'm going to pick on one. There's one that begins with the letter V.
Yeah, there you go.
And its name rhymes with bodyguard. So I think I might have given it away, but not to say it's a bad choice, but their target retirement date fund, once you retire, hits 50% in stocks and 50% in bonds.
Yes.
But what folks don't know is that it actually gets more conservative 7 years down the road to 30% in stocks.
Yep.
Well,
but they call it the glide slope. They call it a glide slope.
And that could be a problem because, as Steve mentioned before, if you want to do the 4% withdrawal rate strategy, that was within a 50 to 75% stock range. So that can really blow up your withdrawal strategy. So this is something you need to pay attention to if you're going to pick a target retirement date fund.
I just want to mention some of the latest research is kind of counterintuitive. They recommend you become more aggressive as you get older, believe it or not, which is very interesting.
Steve, this is a perfect segue. So there is some evidence-based data that shows, well, maybe you don't want to get more conservative and stay conservative once you retire. Maybe you actually want to treat your risk almost like a V shape. So if your risk level's here 10 years before you hit retirement, your risk should be getting lower. You should be buying more bonds to serve as a equity dampener. And then once you retire, every year thereafter, maybe you actually want to get more aggressive. So by doing this type of strategy, there's some evidence, empirical data that shows you would actually fare better doing this than doing like that target date glide path or glide slope, as Steve alluded to.
Yep.
So there's another major disadvantage of using a target date fund. So when you contribute to a target date fund, you contribute 20 cents, has to go into international bonds. Every dollar you put in, 30 cents has to go into US stocks. So when you take money out, does that mean you can pick and choose where you take a dollar from? So I think most folks would be surprised that when you take money out, if let's say international is having a great year and it's up 20%, and US stocks are having a bad year and it's down 30%, can I just go and take every dollar from what's up 20%? The answer is no. You actually have to take 30 cents on the dollar from every piece of the pie. So
it's allocated.
It's almost the opposite of sound investing 101, right? We want to sell high and we want to buy low. This does not allow you to do that. Now,
they're apportioning it.
Exactly. Now, if you aren't 100% comfortable telling the investment company, well, I'd like to take X amount of dollars from this fund and I'd like to take X amount of dollars from this fund, they will give you the withdrawal on a pro rata basis or proportionately. So if you need $50,000 and you have 10 different fund choices, they're going to take $5,000 proportionately from each choice. Now, that's not a bad way of doing it. However, there's times in the stock and bond market where mathematically it's actually not the best way of pulling money out, and that you may actually want to strategically take from what's up and what's down in a certain order. And that's also beware of something called the hierarchy trap. So there are some 401ks out there that don't even do it on a pro rata basis. And when you take withdrawal, you actually have to take it from the most liquid or stable asset first. So for example, they may take a withdrawal from your money market account. Well, at first glance, this may seem great. What happens is over time, your portfolio will actually start to get more aggressive. So beware of this hierarchy trap. And the one way to avoid that trap is to roll over your 401k or 403b, if it makes sense, into your own IRA so that you can better control your withdrawals.
That's right. Yep.
Now you're probably wondering, where do I go from here? And you can certainly try to do this on your own. Being certified financial planner professionals, Steve and I, we specialize in working with folks get to retirement and throughout the retirement journey, not just from an educational standpoint, but also from an implementation side of things. So we've provided a QR code here for some of our viewers. If you have a personal or detailed question, or if you'd like to review your personal circumstance, we'd be happy to do that. You can scan the QR code. And then in addition, we also have a monthly newsletter. I'm a little bit biased. We think it's pretty cool. It's actually a video monthly newsletter where we have an advanced financial planning topic and an advanced
Yes.
financial investment topic. Steve is our chief
Yep.
investment officer. So he regularly contributes to that. Just write in the comments section, monthly newsletter, and we'd be happy to add you to the list.
And I want to mention that our videos are also on our YouTube channel. It's Your Smarter Money and YouTube. We probably have about 50 or 60 videos there. Greg has done, and my partner Laura and I have done there. And Greg, I want to mention that we're also doing a webinar next week as well. Perhaps mention that.
Yeah, no, we happen to do a webinar next week on how to invest like an endowment. If you'd like to get information on that webinar, you can scan the QR code and in the comment section write endowment webinar as well.
Yeah. Yep.
So with that being
Yeah.
said, we hope you found this valuable. We hope you can implement some of this moving forward. And with that being said, I'll swing things back over to Margaret.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. I found it very enlightening, and I think everyone in the audience probably feels like they better understand the path toward retirement. We have received a few questions, so
Okay.
is it all right if I dive in to those?
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Please do.
And the first is there any software available to allow retirees to model out their portfolios and expenses and then optimize withdrawals from various sources such as brokerage, IRAs, Roth IRAs to minimize taxes? Greg, do you want to start by answering the first one?
Sure.
I can start with that.
Yep.
There is software out there. There's cash flow based software with the Monte Carlo. There's Money Guide Pro. There's eMoney.
I think Greg may want to know whether there's anything for a consumer though, perhaps.
Yeah, that's going to be a
Yeah.
little bit harder.
Yeah.
I mean, you could try Dinky Town. That's a little bit tough. No one really knows who the person is, but they kind of put together some spreadsheets. But from a
Yeah.
consumer standpoint, I think it's a little bit tough.
Yeah. Our software is very costly. It's very advanced, and it is updated constantly. I don't know of many good things out there for individuals, quite honestly, but we're not experts on what's out there for consumers, though. So,
a great question.
But if they came to someone like you, and I believe that there's other really well-intentioned financial advisors too,
Mhm.
who, would give a quick consult for them.
Yep.
You would run them through that and take some of the considerations, like, you'll need another vehicle every
Yep.
few years, and some of the examples that you mentioned. So, Matt, I hope that helps you out. All right, and now there are some of the initials that you mentioned that I remember and some that I don't, so I'm not sure. I hope this question is going to make sense to you. Are the LTC presented annual costs?
A long-term care.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, long-term care. Gotcha.
Yep. Greg, I think you know more about that than I do. You want to talk about it?
Sure. I'm sorry. What was the question again? What about long-term care?
Were are the LTC presented annual costs?
Those were annual. So I'm sorry. They were monthly. Those were monthly costs. So going back
Yeah.
to the slides, the nursing home in Trenton for like 2039 was like $30,000 a year, a month. So I realize it's an astronomical number. Also know the inflation rate on those projections was about 5% per year.
Mm.
So if you estimate expenses of, let's call it 14,000 or 12,000 today, that's what it'll be 14 years from now in 2039. I know they're very scary numbers, but like I said, you need to look at the data to really see, well, is that feasible? And also, obviously, we
Yeah.
can't predict our health, but if you have
Right.
a history of some chronic illness, then maybe you want to, at a very minimum, be stress testing your portfolio to see how a 3 or 4 year or even 10-year long-term care event would impact your portfolio.
Yeah, and I want to mention 10 years an outlier. Greg, what's the average? Is it 18 to 24 months, I think, for a long-term for a nursing home stay?
If they need it, usually
Yeah,
for women, it's a little bit longer. It's like 3.4 years, and for a male, it might be
3.4
like
years.
one and
Okay.
a half, roughly, give or
Yeah.
take.
I
Average
mean, we have
span.
seen outliers. I have one, I know one personally, I won't bring up, but you know, 20 years, but that's a real outlier.
Oh, okay. Next question is the income replacement rate assuming that you own your home and have no credit card debt?
Yeah, yes, it does. Because all it really matters is how much what your recurring expenses are. And by the way, in those numbers, we typically assume that the income is only coming from your invested assets, not your home. Typically, there's an assumption that you're never selling your home, if I'm understanding the question properly.
Yeah, some of the question, I almost interrupted you during the presentation because some came up
Yeah.
on specific slides, and I was like,
Ah,
maybe should I stop them and clarify this point? So, Felicia, I hope we've addressed your two questions there. Um,
yes.
and I know you talked a little bit about RMD. So, how does the RMD affect withdrawal rates?
Okay. Uh, it really depends on what your tax bracket is, because if you have a low, because RMD rate is going to be the same either way, but it's how much you lose of it, how much of it you lose or have to pay in taxes, right? If you're in a really low tax bracket and you're doing an RMD and you're only losing 10% of it, obviously that 4% rate was based on a 30% tax rate, by the way. That's what he used in his projection in that case. If you're only a 10% bracket when you're doing an RMD, probably you won't be, but arguments, let's just use that as an example. Your withdrawal rate could probably be a little higher. But again, we start to have a lot of moving pieces here, which is why we like to simulate this stuff in software. It's I mean, it's nice to have just general rules of thumb just to give you a rough idea what you can expect, but we got to play it out in a simulation. And as Greg brought up, we got to look at your lumpy expenses. You may have more expenses in one year. That could push you into a higher bracket that one year because you have to do withdraw more money from an IRA. We really have to look at it and really simulate it. And we go through many simulations. We go through many different versions of a person's retirement. We'll go through various scenarios. We'll test different things, saying, all right, what happens if I want to have a travel budget of 20,000 a year? As Greg mentioned, what happens if I want to gift money to my children? We just had one, they wanted to loan their children 70,000, argument's sake. But the rules of thumb are great. It gives you a great idea, but ultimately we want to simulate it.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
and I'm just going to add real quickly to that, if you don't mind,
Hmm.
Mark. There's a lot of, it's tough to say because it can trigger some hidden taxes. So it
Yeah.
may cause your Social Security benefit to go from a 24% taxable rate to 40% in some instances.
Yep.
It could
Yep.
cause you to creep into the net investment income tax, which is an additional 3.8% tax on investment income. It could
Yep.
also potentially cause you to lose your subsidies for ACA health insurance if you need health insurance before you reach Medicare. So it's really tough to say, but you have to be looking at all the components.
And you bring up a good point, Greg, because what happens, you could actually be in a marginal bracket that's much higher than the published brackets. We call it a tax torpedo, because as Greg says, suddenly more of your Social Security is being taxed. Suddenly you're getting pushed into IRMA. You could be in a really high bracket for just an additional few dollars. So it's something we typically, by the way, run tax projections for our clients year by year as well, just to see what to help them decide, well, gee, if I really do need to take a lot of money out of my IRA other than an RMD, maybe I should take half out this year and half out next year. There's a lot of different strategies we look at there.
It sounds like the simulations really show the unintended consequences of,
Yeah.
some of these decisions. I think that more helpful than I even realized, and sort of the, original AI, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's true.
So, the next question references a source that you cited on one or more of the slides, Michael Kitce. Um,
Yes, Michael Kitches. Yep.
and they were just asking who that was.
Oh,
Um,
sure. You can actually go to his website. It's kitces.com, kitces.com. And he's actually he's probably one of the most intelligent people in his profession. I know Michael, I personally, and he's you can find all kinds of wonderful information there. including one of the studies we mentioned that it actually may make sense to actually increase the risk in your portfolio as you age. And so I saw somebody put in a question regarding that. Yeah, it does depend on your overall circumstance. Again, nothing is a hard and fast rule. Everything has to be simulated in relation to a person's overall circumstance, in our view. But I highly recommend going to Michael Kitch's website. He's very generous with his research and his information. So, and Greg, you just heard him speak recently at an event.
Yes, I'm on the board of the Financial Planning Association, and we just had him at our May symposium. And he's a influencer in our industry, and
Yep.
we use some of his research, but we also use a lot of the other academic research as well. And
Yep.
you really want to have a wide range of research to use, and that's customized and tailored to you and your family and your goals.
Great. Greg, I was wondering if you could toggle back to a slide or two to show that QR code again, because we had someone ask about
Sure.
offering consultations. I'm not sure that the offer is for a full-scale consultation, but certainly a starter conversation of 10 or 15 minutes to figure out
We'll offer
a
an hour.
potential next step.
We'll offer an hour. We call it a get acquainted meeting. We'll answer some basic questions in that hour. So too.
Yeah, so that was I saw Sharon and maybe there were some others who asked that question. So I hope that's helpful um, for those who wanted to get a chance to scan that QR code again. Um, okay, Jenny asks, are 401k withdrawals taxed as income or capital gains?
Income. Very
Great
simple.
question.
Ordinary income. Yep.
It
Okay,
can be very confusing. It's ordinary income.
Yep.
Yep.
okay. Um,
Yeah. I wish it was capital gains because that'd only be
Yeah.
15% or 20, generally.
all right, the next question is, oh, I think you might have started to touch on this, Steve. This might have been the one that you saw coming in. Are these models based upon full retirement and not having another source of income, such as a side business or consulting? One of my role models has just retired from his consultancy in his late 80s after retiring from previous government roles and corporate roles, the kind of Warren Buffett model. Are there special considerations for earning an income until very late in life?
So obviously it means you're going to have to you'll need to withdraw less from your portfolio. So your portfolio may grow more and you may not the odds that you're going to run out of money are going to be significantly reduced. But there's also tax consequences we have to look at. But the 4% was just look at it this way. If you need $100,000 a year and you can deduct from that your recurring source of income, your Social Security, and then say, all right, I need 50,000 a year. And really, effectively, 4% means you multiply that by what, 25. So your portfolio should be roughly 25 times the size of that 50,000. You can look at it from that view. That's another way of looking at Social Security, by the way. If you're getting 50,000 from Social Security, and you're assuming a 4% rate of return on a bond these days, I mean, Social Security is worth about what, 1.2, 1.3 million, roughly, effectively, not even counting the COLA, by the way. So you have to look at the whole picture and look at what recurring income you have and how much you need from your portfolio in relation to its size.
Great. Here's a question that I will take. I've seen it in a couple places, so um, in a different format. For the people who joined late and didn't hear me mention, we are recording this session. It will be made available to you. We'll send it to you via email. It gets posted on our Business Insights page of our website, and we also have some opportunity to share it on social media. So I see Gail and Jerry and a couple other people asked,
Mm.
some that question. So I usually repeat it as part of my closing, but so
Mhm.
many questions about it were coming in. So,
Mm.
Yeah.
um,
Time.
all right.
Uh,
Let's go
do
ahead, Greg.
could we do one or two more or no? I know we have so many.
So why don't I do this? Why don't I just mention some of my closing remarks for anyone who has to go? And then if you gentlemen don't mind staying, we can address
Sure.
all of the questions. And anyone who posed a question, we'll get to it. We just if you've
Sure.
left already, it may be part, you'll have to listen to it as part of the recording. So when people are logging off, they will receive a quick survey. We value the feedback on that survey, and we look to it to find topics and presenters for future webinars. So please do fill that out for us. Our webinars take place on Fridays at noon Eastern, and this series is on the odd numbered months of the year. So you'll see the virtual Lunch and Learn series again coming in September. Um, I mentioned just a few moments ago that the recording is archived and the presentation um, that therefore is shared in the the methods that I mentioned. So I usually thank both of you too in those closing remarks, but I will save that till the very, very end.
Sure.
And if anyone has to go, I do thank you for joining us today, and we'll get through all of the questions before we conclude. But if you have to go, we certainly want to be respectful of your lunch hour. All right, so back to the questions. I believe that I was at this one. Does the
Hmm.
minimum withdrawal requirement part of, um, Lily Siad, you may have to clarify this. Does the minimum withdrawal requirement part of 4% withdrawal is what it says, and I'm not sure if that's
Hmm.
enough of a question to go on.
Is it the minimum percent? Is that what they're asking? Um, well, I don't know if they're talking about required minimum distributions
Hmm.
or they're talking about the 4% withdrawal rate. But I mean, you could take, if you're talking about the withdrawal rate, you can take less than 4%, and that'll, of course, add more uh, capital to your portfolio. So you can take less than 4%. That will sustain it longer than perhaps 30 years. Once again, you'd have to run the projections on it. But as it relates to required minimum distributions, typically once somebody reaches 73, which is anybody born between 1951 and 1959, the following April, once they turn age 73, they are required to take out a minimum distribution. Typically,
It's
that
based on our
percentage.
life expectancy, the IRIS tables.
Exactly. And typically that's roughly 4%. It's probably like 3.65 in the first year. And the
Yeah.
next year it goes up to 3.77. It's not until you hit your 90s where you're required to take out 10% of your account mandatorily. So hopefully that answers your question. But that's around the withdrawal rates end as it relates to required minimum distributions.
Yep.
Okay, so um, we have Sean asking some questions. And Sean, it may be better to do a little bit of a consult, but I'll try to have these answered in generalities. So he's in a situation with an inherited 401k.
Uh,
Um, he says, since I'm no longer with the company, can this be rolled over into a traditional IRA, and would that give more flexibility with investments and required withdrawals? There's a bunch of other questions behind, after that, but I don't want you to forget what
Yeah.
the questions were. So you want me to
oh, go ahead, Greg. Why don't you
let you
address
address
this?
that part
I
first?
was just going to say this is a loaded
Yeah.
question here, Sean. It seems like you have a lot on your mind, but the short answer is yes. And this is definitely more of a personal and detailed question. We'd invite you to scan the QR code from before. We'd be happy to talk to you a little
Yeah,
bit
Yeah.
further about
you
that.
can you can toggle back to that if now would be a good time for someone to revisit that slide with that particular QR code. Yeah, some of it gets a little bit more specific than I think we can address now.
Sure.
Um, but rest assured, Sean, resources are available to address those type of questions, and it's the reason why we start by saying things like, our responses wouldn't be for everyone. Everyone has such a unique situation.
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to go over to the chat because there were a few questions in there
Mm-hmm.
as well. So let me see if I can find the first ones. I think the first one was actually, what are your thoughts on Roth conversions?
Yeah. Go ahead, Greg. Maybe address that.
It can be a very powerful tool. A lot of the folks we meet with, they may have 80, 90, 100% of their accounts in tax deferred accounts, which when they have to pull them out are taxed at the highest ordinary income tax rates. So with that being said, if you can implement a Roth conversion at the right time, and you don't necessarily need the money for living expenses, you can let the Roth IRA marinate for a bit and grow. It's incredibly tax efficient to do that. So the other way around, it's horrifically tax inefficient if 100% of your retirement assets are in a 401k or 403b and they're tax deferred. So with that being said, we're very big proponents of Roth IRAs if and when they're appropriate.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yep.
I think I shouldn't show favoritism, but I think this is probably one of my favorite questions that's coming up because it's sort of one that was on my mind too. Wouldn't the question of changing risk level as you get older be driven by the adequacy of your remaining assets more than a generic strategy of increasing or decreasing risk? For example, if your probability of success is going up since retirement, then you can afford to be more risky, whereas if it is the opposite, you can't afford the risk.
That's certainly true. And by the way, the study I quoted is, they're always generic. And so we can use those as rules of thumb and say, gee, perhaps it's something to consider to become a little bit more growth oriented as you get older. But on the other hand, we always want to simulate it and test it in regards to your circumstance. The studies are nice, but they're generic. And even the 4% rule, it's a nice baseline rule, but we have to look at everybody's situation on a case by case. But there is research out there saying that it may make sense to become a little bit more growth oriented. For that reason that Greg mentioned, the sequence risk issue in particular. But again, I hate to always set a hard and fast rule for anybody. So
Yeah. Yeah.
Just, oh,
yeah, go ahead,
uh,
Greg. Sure.
I was just going to quickly add to that, Margaret. It sounds like the person asking the question is more comfortable taking on more risk with more wealth. And for that person, that they may want to leave a bigger legacy, is what it sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you could afford to take more risk, but then we have some clients that don't want to take risk for risk's sake. And when we
Yep.
run the financial plan, why aim for 7-8% return a year when all they need is 4% to drive their plan with a high level of success?
Yep.
So once again,
Yep.
really dependent upon the situation, and every situation's different.
Yeah.
Yep.
Every answer has to really be like, we'll run it through the simulation, really,
Yeah,
truly,
that's
with
how it is.
with everyone's unique situation, plugged into that. But
In my case, that's the engineer in me. I like to model things.
yeah, they see that experience came in very helpful.
Yes.
Yeah. Our next question is, what are your thoughts on yield max income generating products, portfolios that deliver weekly or monthly income?
Yeah, I'm not really
Good
that
man.
familiar with them, but I will tell you, I'm always really cautious if like I said, I don't know a lot about it, but I'm really cautious about any kind of complex investment product because, in the world of investing, first, there was two rules. First, by the way, it was a Rutgers professor who wrote it on the board. I'll never forget him any longer. Morgan, I'm not sure you knew him, Dr. Nadler. He was at Rutgers. I had him for a couple courses at Rutgers. We went into his class or his lecture hall one day, and he had written on the blackboard Tinstaafl. We all looked at it and said, "What did Dr. Nadler forget how to spell something?" And so as we walked in, he finally announced what it was in his gravelly voice. There is no such thing as a free lunch, and that's one thing to remember in the world of investing. There is no such thing as a free lunch. So complex products generally, in our experience, are generally configured to provide profits for the company that created the product and not necessarily to the benefit of the people that purchased the product. So I tell you, I would keep it simple. Now, again, I don't know that particular product, but in general, I would keep it simple personally. And there's always a lot of times risks that can't be readily identified with these products too. And we're always cautious about risks. We can quantify a lot of risks mathematically, but there are a lot of risks that can't be quantified mathematically, what I call event risk. And that's when a really bad event occurs. And that happened with long-term capital. If you look at what happened with long-term capital, there's a book about this in the 1990s. They had people that were physicists that were saying, gee, the odds that we can generate this type of return by taking advantage of a tiny mispricing and a type of bond that I forgot the type is specific type of bond, but didn't plan on a really bad financial event occurring, which really led them to actually, because they had also had leverage, them losing tons of money. They end up the company went bankrupt, long-term capital, I believe. So I'm always really, really cautious with complex things. Generally, if you're lucky if you can get 4 or 5% yield on something, quite honestly. And if you're getting more than that, you definitely in the current environment, you're taking on risk that you can't readily identify that may exist. So I'd be cautious.
Okay, great. Our next question comes from one of my colleagues here at Rutgers Business School. Um, do you find that most retiree spending is consistent across 20 to 30 years, or does it follow a different pattern?
Greg, maybe you take that.
Happy to take that one. So
Yeah.
the short answer is no. Now they do have some academic studies. Once again, this is general in
Hmm.
nature, but they find that usually in the first 10 years of retirement out of 30 years, let's say, first 10 years, the go-go years, usually spend close on average 100% of your pre-retirement income for some people. Then during the second stage, the second phase, uh, the slow go years, the next 10 years, consumption usually falls about maybe 1 or 2% per year. So what that means is about 70% of your retirement income. And then in the final phase, the no-go years, they call it, it
Yeah.
actually ticks up a little bit because of increased healthcare expenses. But overall, it works out to be around 60% of your retirement income because of the major decrease in consumption, right? Because you're in your last 10 years. So
You're not
once
traveling
again,
as much, for example. You
exactly.
may be
So
one of those people I still remember them driving around that old Rambler. They saw a 20-year-old car.
but once again, everybody's different. Some
Yep.
people have
Yep.
different goals. I wouldn't necessarily go by that, but yeah, I mean, if you look at the average studies, it's definitely going to be variable. And for some people, they want to spend even more the first 10 years. So maybe you're over 100%. Really
Yep.
depends on what you want.
And you may decide, I want to really travel a lot when I'm healthier. And also in 10 years, I may just get tired of waiting at airports and stuff. So it really varies again by person. And by the way, one thing I want to bring up is that we tend to redo people's projections every year or two to take into account things that may have changed, tax laws, which just happened again, actually, more changes in the investment environment and also changes in their spending pattern. It's important to not just run a simulation once, but also to revisit it on a recurring basis too. And we do that routinely for most of our clients.
Fantastic. Well, I think we're coming up to our very last question. I'm going to take
All
some of
right.
the personal parts out of this and just say, um, does moving a 401k over to an SEP, SEP IRA give greater flexibility on RMDs? Are there advantages and disadvantages?
You want to take that, Greg?
Sure. I mean, I don't think there's much of a advantage or disadvantage. I think the one disadvantage in a SEP IRA versus the 401k is that IRAs, you can't take loans, right? I
Mm,
mean, you shouldn't be taking loans to begin with, only as a last resort. But in an IRA, you can never take a loan, whereas a 401k, you can, right? It's
hmm.
usually $50,000 or 50% of the account, whichever's lesser. That's usually the rule. But as far as you have to look at the options. Yes, presumably in the SEP IRA, wherever you hold the IRA, if it's a Charles Schwab or wherever, you should have a much diverse ability to pick different options. Maybe have more of a defensively positioned portfolio than what's in your 401k. And then also from a uh, withdrawal standpoint, as we talked about before, depending upon if you're subject to the hierarchy trap, if it's pro rata distributions, the SEP IRA, you have more control on how you distribute. And of course, if you hire professional help, you have more control as well. So I think the SEP IRA could be beneficial in that regard. And I don't see any downside right now aside from the loan provision.
Hmm.
Oh, and
And
actually, now that I'm thinking about it, most folks don't know this, but if you need asset protection, the
Right.
IRA, from a creditor protection standpoint, you can only shield, I believe, up to 1.7 million. However, if you roll it over from a 401k to an IRA, it's unlimited protection. So I'm probably confusing some people, but in this case, if they rolled it over from the 401k, most likely that actually may be a moot point. So I'm just thinking about it out loud here.
I want to
But
mention
anyway,
that Greg wrote an article on that just recently. He can send you if you want to on asset protection, right, Greg?
yes, we featured it in MD Life, which is for medical doctors. Happy
Yeah.
to pass that along. If you take a picture of the QR code, we could do that for you.
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, I appreciate this so much. We went overtime. I appreciate the
Hmm.
audience who stuck with us. I certainly appreciate everyone's great questions. And Greg and Steve, this is kind of our second annual webinar. I certainly hope we have some more together because I think we make a good team bringing
Thank you.
great information to the Rutgers Business School community and beyond.
Great.
Well, thank you again for having us, and
Yeah.
we're happy to get the education out there.
Great.
Absolutely. We love it. We love doing it. So.
Well, to you gentlemen, thank you. To our audience, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll have that recording sent out to everyone who participated. Thank you. Have a great day.
Goodbye, everybody.
Yeah.
Bye.